Good morning, everybody. With respect to our honorable guests, I'll turn into English. And as I've used to say, I like the English language like I like my daughters, but I control neither one of them. We are going to see now the two versions, two extreme versions, I'd say, of educational policy, two approaches. Thinking about it, and I've seen the films which we'll see now, I'm myself a graduate in elementary school of two systems which do resemble to some extent the Finnish, or the other way around, the Japanese and the Finnish system. I've done part of my elementary basic education in a school, a very regular, rigid school with testing left and right. That was a few weeks ago, like 1945. And then I shifted to another school with a strong political inclination then, but very much influenced by Dewey, progressive education and the like. I know which of the two I prefer very clearly. But having been to Japan and having seen the film, which we'll see in a minute, one cannot easily dismiss the Japanese system, despite the fact that it looks extremely rigid, regimented, military-like, and certainly not of, I can say personally, my own liking. We will hear two distinguished guests, one from the United Kingdom, one from Finland, and we'll hear each of them after we see the two movies. First, the Japanese, about 20 minutes long.
Behind the explanations for Japan's post-war rise, her rapid take-up of new technology, her disciplined workforce, there is one common factor. Japan's high level of education and the habits and attitudes learned in school have been crucial to her economic success. Each year, young Japanese race to read the exam results, which will tell them if they've made it to the most prestigious university in the country, Tokyo. This is the high ground of Japanese education. These students are almost guaranteed top jobs in government and business. They've just passed the most important exams in their lives. But in Japan, educational success is not just a matter for individuals. Education has been given the highest national priority for over 120 years. The founders of modern Japan believed that to catch up with the West industrially, they had first to build an efficient school system. Today, the Ministry of Education, the Monbusho, still runs the schools with a tight central grip. From Tokyo, it controls the detail of school life for 21 million children, the size of their desks and classrooms, the textbooks they use, what they study, and for how long. Their guidelines are passed down through local offices to produce the most standardized and quality-controlled mass school system in the world. With its extraordinary achievements and great pressures, it explains much about modern Japan. The long educational march begins for 6-year-olds. They'll go to elementary school until they're 12, then junior high school.
おはようございます。休め。
Wherever they start school, small Japanese will be taught the same basic skills, the same discipline, by the same teaching methods.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
After 6 years of this conditioning, when they reach the age of 12, children move on to junior high school. At 7:50 in the morning, Keiko Takumi, age 15, starts out for school. If the atmosphere at elementary school was quite relaxed, junior high school is much more serious. Children are required to wear uniforms still modelled on those worn in Germany when the Japanese studied their schools 100 years ago. Junior high school is where the real pressures of the school system start to show themselves. The common experience of millions of children between the ages of 12 and 15 in schools like this helps mould the national character as it was always intended to.
Don't just hang around grinning. Don't be selfish. Hurry up. You're being a nuisance keeping everyone waiting.
Throughout junior high school, and especially for third years like Keiko, the overriding concern is, where are they going next?
Entrance to senior high school is getting tougher and more competitive. Don't listen if your older brothers and sisters tell you it was easy for them, because things are very different from last year. And it looks as if things will be even more competitive next year.
Most children are competing to get into a good senior high school, which in turn is the only way to a good university and a good job. In the nationally imposed curriculum, the key subjects are Japanese, science and mathematics. Classes are large. The national average is around 40.
Come on, stop chattering. CB is parallel with AD like the edges of a strip of paper. And what qualities do parallel lines have? Can you remember what is peculiar to parallel lines? They have alternate angles, interior angles, and corresponding angles.
This isn't the fast track. There's no streaming. All children, the bright and the less bright, study together. All do algebra and geometry and have to take exams in them. The teaching method is formal, almost lecture-like, with constant drilling and testing.
We want every child to do well, so we put a lot of effort into teaching the basics. But because we also want to stretch them, we give them some very difficult problems. And so the ones who are not good at maths don't lose out. We get them to study in pairs to work it out together.
After class, in the 10-minute break, teachers try to give individual help if the message still isn't getting through. In science, again, there's no streaming. All Japanese children have to cover the same ground together in large classes. Each school is in step with all the others, reaching the same point in the curriculum at the same time. Children must learn to imitate faithfully and accurately and repeat the same movements endlessly. It's a training in precision and manual control. By the time they'd left elementary school, they'd learned to read and write 1,000 characters. In the 3 years of junior high school, there are another 1,000 to go. A foreign language is compulsory. It's almost always English.
Stand up first. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Please sit down.
3:30 p.m., the end of official school work. At the end of every day, in every state school in Japan, the cleaning is done by the children themselves. It's part of a continuing effort to put across a set of public values and encourage frugality, self-help, and working as a group. As night falls, the second unofficial side of the Japanese educational machine is just starting up in cities across Japan. Keiko is on her way to an institution that plays a major part in children's lives, the Juku. Jukus are the cramming schools Japanese children go to make sure they can pass the exams they need. They're privately run, highly profitable businesses. Jukus supplement the unstreamed egalitarian teaching of the schools with an even more exam-focused concentration on the facts. Tonight, it's a 2-hour class on the First World War and more. In the last year of junior high school, over half the 15-year-olds in Japan, more in cities like Osaka and Tokyo, attend Juku. It's the crucial year because the 15+, the senior high school entrance exams, affect every child's future. It's a major family expense, an average of £1,500 a year. So long as other children are going, parents feel they have to send theirs. A short break for a takeaway supper. School isn't streamed, but the Jukus certainly are. There are courses for the children who are behind, for the average, and for the very cleverest in Mr. Maida's class. Just to improve concentration, he takes the register during a speeded-up maths test.
How long have we got, sir?
I know it says 25 minutes, but you're doing it in 20, okay?
The maths they're doing is around British A-level standard. The commitment from mothers needs to be just as great. In a coffee bar around the corner, Mrs. Psyche waits for her son to finish at 9:30 and then drives him the hour's journey back home. At 10 p.m., it's time for Keiko to head home. She stays this late 6 nights a week, and at her stage, there's nothing particularly unusual about it. She still has to do her homework for school and Juku. She'll go to bed about 1. There's a bravado exhortation which children use. Pass with 4, fail with 5, referring to hours of sleep.
We have a phrase, examination hell, which we use in Japan. It's existed for quite a long time. The problem starts in elementary school, but it causes most concern at junior high school, where things are even more intense than at senior high. That's the trend in Japan. I want most of all for my child to be brought up as a well-rounded human being. But children these days have to give up cultivating their characters, or they won't get through the exams. And I think that's a big worry for Japan.
Every morning, Mr. Asano, the deputy headmaster, opens up Kozo Junior High at 7:15.
Stand up if your braids are not fixed on properly, or if you haven't got your badge. You're a really sloppy lot, aren't you? Pull yourselves together. Right, all stand up.
With this degree of control, problems of violence or vandalism hardly exist by Western standards. But with all the emphasis on conformity, children who stand out are sometimes bullied, and for years the Japanese were worried by the suicide rate in schools. It's fallen fast over the past 20 years and is now lower for this age group than in the United States or Britain. Exams and tests set the pace in Japanese schools. They're trained to answer questions quickly under pressure of time. Within ordinary classwork, there are constant tests. There are regular national exams set by the ministry and school ability tests. But the climax is the senior high school entrance exam at the end of the 3rd year. It's a carefully calibrated system that will separate children of different ability and send them in different directions when they leave Kozu. Like every school, Kozu has a surgery. Many of the children who come to the nurse have symptoms related to tiredness for whatever reason. In Osaka, they talk about shindoi, which roughly translates as knackered. In the last month before they take the senior high school entrance, there are a series of mock exams building up to the real thing.
It was exhausting and very difficult, and now I've got a tummy ache. I think it's called junior high school syndrome.
Saturday morning, and school as usual. With 6 days a week and far shorter holidays, the Japanese child goes to school for 240 days of the year, compared with 193 days in Britain or 180 in the United States. It adds up to an additional year of education. In international comparisons of maths and science ability, Japanese children come highest in the world. With a far smaller variation between the best and the worst levels, they do work that's reckoned to be 2 years ahead of British children of 13. The fact that 9 out of 10 children do maths till they're 18 to a level not far below A-level gives Japan its highly numerate workforce. On Saturday, lessons stop at lunchtime, but activities carry on. The Brass Band Club is holding its 6th meeting of the week, but its ranks are depleted. Third-year children aren't allowed to take part in out-of-school activities for 6 months before their senior high school exams. And for children of all ages, Saturday afternoon is not a time for relaxation, but for even more hours at Juku. It's the peak period of the week, with some children doing a 6-hour stint from mid-afternoon to late evening. The emphasis is on factual knowledge or choosing the correct interpretation, not on expressing individual opinions.
Okay, who's got 100%? 90%? 80%? It's one person. 70%? 40%? Really? Only 40%?
Keiko doesn't know it this time. She'll have to study more to do well in her exams. At 10 on a Saturday night, Osaka mothers come to collect their exhausted children.
Even on my only day off a week, I'm not free to play, so I'm not too keen on that. Actually, I hate it, but there's nothing to be done about it.
Kozu, like other schools, turns a blind eye to the jukus. They know the children go to them, but there's nothing they can do. Like the children and parents, they're all locked into the same competitive race. Mothers stay in close touch with the schools. They're invited to a talk given to the third year on what senior high school will be like and what will be expected.
You must have a clear aim in choosing a particular senior high school, whether it be an ordinary high school or a vocational school or whatever. If you don't, you run the risk of relaxing after the relief of being selected and slacking off. If you lead a sloppy lifestyle, not knowing when you should be studying or when you should be doing club activities, it means you're not a good student. That will be even more of a problem at senior high school. So I want you to get your priorities right and achieve a balance in life.
一般な高校生とは言えないわけであります。だから生活にですね、メリハリをつけ、けじめをつけてほしいということであります。一本ではですね、確かに
In Japan, knowledge is growing all the time.
体力の方が
But it is important to develop your physical fitness as well,
将来として
if you are to grow properly and to mature.
改正しないと言いますか。
This is why you must play a full part in club activities.
クラブ活動はやっぱりしっかりと
But after the clubs finish, you mustn't mess around on your way home.
Though they push their children on the one hand, most parents are torn.
I wonder if all this allows their feelings and their bodies to develop properly. I know their minds are developing, but I really wonder about their bodies and their emotional development. They should all grow together. If only they could play more and learn about a greater variety of things and make more friends.
This is a time when they should be developing their feelings and enriching their humanity. But it isn't being used for that at all. And the evil effects of this on their spirits are going to show when they get older.
Within Japan, there is a growing debate about the real quality of children's education and whether it crushes individuality and creativity. Its critics say the education machine turns out pliant, unassertive, uniform minds on a conveyor belt. Pressure on children has grown since the war, with the increased competition and what they call examination hell. The school year ends in March with graduation ceremonies at all the junior high schools. In terms of mass literacy and numeracy, the schools have served the country brilliantly. But now there's a fear that they won't produce the original scientists and thinkers Japan will need in the future. The government has launched major reform commissions, but so far, nothing's been changed. They've come to the end of compulsory school. At this point, over half the children in Britain leave full-time education, most of them to look for work. In all Japan, it's 6%. The rest stay on at school. The few who do leave now will go to less secure jobs as delivery men or to work in very small businesses. Most production line jobs will be closed to them. Employers will say they're not the right material. But for the 94% who are going to stay on in education until they're 18, the paths divide. A quarter of them will go to senior high schools with a technical or commercial emphasis. They'll be able to learn engineering skills or a building trade while still keeping up maths and science. And they'll study computers before they go into the offices or the factories at 18. The majority of children will advance to normal academic senior high school, where the grind continues for university entrance exams. 60% of all Japanese children now go to some sort of higher education, 30% to university, a figure that's risen steadily. Keiko succeeded in getting into the senior high school she was aiming for. She's leapt the first big hurdle. There'll be more juku and more pressure on the way to university. Whatever the excesses, the real accomplishment of Japan's schools is not the creation of a university elite. It's the high level of schooling it gives to the mass of ordinary children and the way it prepares them for a modern industrial society.
It is my honor to invite Professor Patricia Broadfoot from the United Kingdom to come forward and to talk about high stakes, high price, how testing damages learning. Some of us know that. Let me briefly describe Professor Broadfoot. It's not easy. I told Patricia that I could simply read her CV. It will take only 15 minutes, so let me be brief. It begins the CV with something very interesting, which for me is a riddle. She is a commander of the British Empire. I didn't know there was only one commander, and it's a woman. It's a great honor, I guess. She is a professor of education part-time at the University of Bristol. She is a vice chancellor of the University of Gloucestershire. She is a professor in some other places, chair of a number of different national committees, and a person that deals quite a bit with the question of testing. Now she is also the Dean of the School of Education, Rafi, in the University of, I wish I could pronounce it, Cheltenham, right? More or less. Thank you. Please welcome Patricia.
Tada, shalom, shapur for the excellence of the existing Israeli education system, and moreover for the courage and the vision to have a conference like this. I think it's tremendously exciting. I'm looking forward to the discussions, and I wish we were having a conference like this in England because we badly need it. I am going to talk today to a title you've got there, High Stakes, High Price, How Testing Damages Learning. And you've just been watching the film. What I hope to share with you, and perhaps even convince you, is that evidence is on my side, the research evidence. And here we are at Tel Aviv University, as you heard the Vice President say, an outstanding research-led university, and it's appropriate that we should be thinking about the evidence which supports one kind of education policy or another. We have had testing of one kind or another, examinations for many thousands of years, going back to ancient China long before the Common Era. You've just seen a film about Japan, which, with its examination hell, so-called, is probably the most extreme version in the world of an exam-dominated system. And it produces, as you saw, conformity, perhaps high levels of achievement as measured by exams, and when the students get to university, what they didn't say in the film is that they do very little. They're tired out and exhausted physically and intellectually. How well is Japan's education system, and indeed how well is Japan's economy doing now? Is passing exams the same as real learning? So, as you've heard, I'm a commander of the British Empire. I'm very pleased to be running the empire, but unfortunately the empire got away from us some time ago, so it's not a very laborious job for me. One of the things that the empire did was to export exams, the idea of exams, around the world to many, many countries, no doubt including this one. That was in the 19th century, when we had an empire. Today, England has exported a different disease around the world, and that is the disease of accountability and national testing. The idea of using data from examination results to measure the quality of the education system, to measure the system, to measure individual institutions, schools, and indeed, increasingly, to measure the performance of individual teachers. And I have friends, neighbours of mine at home, who literally work in schools where they are reduced to tears by the inspector's comments on their teaching and their examination results. So the idea that we have cleverly exported around the world is that it's a good idea to use assessment to measure the quality of education. The first lesson for undergraduates, 4 purposes of assessment. And I simply want to say to you that not all assessment is bad, lots of it is very good. Lots of testing is very good, provided it's used to encourage and guide learning. Formative assessment, we call it feedback. We need to have certification. We need to know if somebody's competent to drive an aeroplane or to be a doctor or whatever it is. What you saw in the film in Japan, the examination hell, is about selection for high school, senior high school, and for Tokyo University. What we're talking about here more today is actually accountability. The idea that we can measure quality of the system, that we should measure the quality of a system through testing and assessment data of various kinds. And it's that, I suggest, it's that that is damaging learning more than anything. So first we need to get clear what we mean by high-stakes testing. I mentioned high stakes, terribly high stakes for those children going through the schools in Japan. You saw how much effort the whole family, including the parents, put into supporting the children's achievements. But high stakes testing is usually used to refer more to national assessment and indeed the public dissemination of institutional results. So in England and elsewhere, we call that league tables. We publish every single school's results on national assessments at the secondary school stage. It is used to judge the quality of a school for 11-year-olds, for 16-year-olds. We use the examination data. We used to use more, but at least some progress has been made. We also have inspection, which judges schools to be failing, satisfactory, good or outstanding based on, among other things, their examination results. So that is high-stakes testing. It's an American expression originally. And the idea behind high-stakes testing is that it's a carrot and stick approach. If your school does well, then it's very nice to be able to say good things about that. We have an international league table of university research achievement. And if you do well in that international league table, you feel very good about it. The idea, too, is to use that to make people try harder. Either the children were trying hard in the film, so schools and teachers will try harder if you publish their exam results. So we monitor school quality and we use the results as data to diagnose institutional weakness and to ensure that, as in Japan, there is a common standard as far as possible across the system. Now, increasingly in England, and maybe here, I don't know, we're using examination data, league tables, to provide parents with the information it is thought they want about school choice. I don't think parents do want that. They want to know if their children are going to be happy in a particular school. However, increasingly, marketisation is happening in education. So I want to share with you now some bits and pieces about what we know about high-stakes testing, how testing damages learning. First of all, for teachers, this is a quotation, it doesn't say so, but it is a quotation from one recent piece of evidence. It's a review of hundreds of pieces of research evidence, literature, from a team in Australia published this year in 2012 by Patricia et al. And he summarizes his findings by saying that basically it shifts the focus from the needs of the child to the needs of the assessment process and its reporting. This is some findings from George Madeus and Margaret Clark, who are well-known scholars in the United States, and they found that high-stakes, high-standards tests do not have a positive effect on teaching and learning. They do not motivate the unmotivated, which of course is not a problem, I'm sure, in Israel, but is a big problem in England and is a big problem in the United States. Children simply aren't motivated by education. It's not equitable. We haven't yet invented a test which is free of cultural bias and works equally well for boys and girls, different ethnic backgrounds, and people with different strengths and weaknesses. And it makes people give up. That's simply what it says there. It makes people give up learning. Another piece of research from the United States by my colleague Bill Firestone, who says where teachers feel more pressure, they respond with short-term test preparation and more focus on didactic instructional strategies, teaching the test in a word. So this is another research review of hundreds of pieces of research conducted by colleagues at Bristol University about 5 or 6 years ago. And again, they found the same thing as the American colleagues. Teachers adopt didactic transmission, telling children what they need to know, and the tests drive the activity, and more importantly, perhaps, those children already struggling because they don't get the good marks and they don't feel they're achieving and they're in danger of giving up, the test has a worse impact on them than anybody else. For those that do well in tests, tests are great, but it's for the ones who don't do well that need the help and encouragement and not the disencouragement, if that's the right word, of tests. Here's another quote from Patricia et al. And there's the full reference of the study that I'm referring to. It's rather a complicated sentence, and I regret, in a way, putting it in. What it means is that concerns in the literature regarding the reliability of high-stakes testing programs say that they are concerned about the ability to achieve impartial, reliable, and unbiased reporting, which is designed to facilitate student, school, and system improvement without bad things happening, without unintended negative consequences for the standing or reputation of particular schools. Very odd construction grammatically. He could have said, what these tests are designed to achieve is school and system improvement using fair tests which produce good information without any bad consequences. My message for you this morning is that's not possible. All the research says it's not possible. There are bad consequences. This, again, is some research from a study I did with colleagues, again from Bristol, way back. You see, in 1999, we studied children from their entry to primary education, age 5, right through, in fact, to when they were 14 or 15, a longitudinal study. But this was particularly about the impact of national assessment, the new national assessment that came in at that time, on the children, on the teachers at the moment. And what we found was that the whole ethos of the classroom changed to become some kind of learning machine. It changed the way in which teachers engage with children, and it gave an emphasis, even in these primary schools with young children, on performance, league tables, targets, and amongst the teachers, their own collegiality, their own teamworking was reduced as they became more and more anxious about whether or not they would be able to achieve the grades amongst their students. They became very anxious. I just put this slide in. It's a different point completely, but I thought it was worth mentioning that actually tests cost a huge amount of money. And this is the Guardian newspaper in England saying how much it costs us money that we could be spending on other things in education and time that we could be spending on other things in education. English school pupils suffer the worst in 2003 and take up to 105 tests and exams during their years at school. Is it necessary? They probably take more now, if anything. So about the students. This is a child we followed as part of the study I mentioned just now. This is a 10-year-old coming up for her national assessments. I never had a good night and I just felt lousy and I wanted to go back to sleep and I just didn't want to do it. I was shaking. I never got all the way through it. Some of it I just didn't know and some of it I just didn't do. I don't think I told my friends about what I did in case it wasn't very good. I didn't want to get shown up about it. Very typical child's reaction to our national assessment. This is a different one, which I picked out from, again, a newspaper. We have an epidemic of young people taking performance-enhancing drugs to pass exams, the new cognitive-enhancing drugs, and things that help you stay awake. And this is another problem of high-stakes exam. No doubt they have a good market in Japan. This is another one which is even sadder, of a young woman who committed suicide because she was worried about her exams. This is not uncommon. You heard on the film, we have a large number of young people committing suicide in England today because of the pressures on them. But perhaps more generalizable is the recent finding by UNICEF from an international study that UK children are the least happy, as rated by themselves, on health, school life and well-being in the world amongst the OECD countries. And I find that quite sad and quite shocking. Here, sadly, is a diagram which doesn't include Israel. I don't know if you were part of this study, but you can see that in terms of our national standing internationally, the happiness quotient of UK students is almost at the bottom of the table, the third or fourth from the bottom. So it does have an effect on this. So students, the impact is stress, anxiety, pressure, and fear. That's the short-term impact and price. The long-term impact and price is the lowering of self-esteem and long-term confidence, especially of low achievers. And it's the long-term self-esteem and confidence that children need to become the lifelong learners of today that we need. So just to summarize again, that students learn to adjust their efforts in terms of their potential perception of their potential future achievement. And more importantly, perhaps even than that, is that they learn to trade for grades. They learn to do work in order to get a mark, not because they're intrinsically interested in it. And many of you here teach university students, like I do, and what do? They trade for grades. rather than looking for the formative feedback which comes from tutors, because they've been trained to do this in school. And of course, girls, as usual, are the worst affected. So this, I thought, just to lighten things a little, is the picture that was drawn by one of these 10-year-olds of the so-called SATS monster. SATS is our National Assessment Standard Achievement Test, SATS. And this is a picture of the SATS monster. And you see on the right-hand side, it says, "He hates children." Now, thirdly, and briefly, of course, it has an effect on the curriculum. If you teach the test, what learning you get is the test, and you get an emphasis on unconnected facts and information. And as I've already suggested, children become more test-oriented rather than learning-oriented. We've heard already from Professor Walensky this morning about the need for the development of 21st century skills, competencies and dispositions, 21st century literacies. Tests encourage a focus on low-level thinking and what is in the test. And unfortunately, as I've said to several people since I've been here, we lack as yet the tools to test 21st century literacies and dispositions. Unfortunately, the testing tools and technologies that we have are still very, very traditional 19th century approaches, using essentially paper and pencil tests and exams. And that is a problem in itself. A final bit of evidence from the UK, which I came across very recently, is that it would seem that intelligence is going down in the UK, and that IQ scores declined on average by 2 points in general between 1980 and 2008, and by 6 points among those of us who like to think we're in the top half of the IQ scale. So that's really very worrying, but who knows why. Now I want to, my last part of my talk is about, I hope, something more positive. This conference is not about, oh dear, this conference is about what next and building on success. I hope I have convinced you, in the time that I've got available, that there is a huge international literature which has been summarized by leading scholars saying that there is incontrovertible evidence that testing damages the kind of learning that we need for our young people to have to be successful and to make our country successful in tomorrow's world. I hope I've made that argument, and I hope you saw from the Japanese film how worried the Japanese are that whilst they're really good at keeping conformity and indeed learning of a kind, they are worried about developing creativity and the kind of free thinking that you heard about earlier from Professor Schleppmann. So the most improved systems focus on process of education, especially how teachers teach. They don't focus on tests, and they aim to improve system performance through these categories. I'm using for evidence here a recent and important piece of work from McKinsey et al., the consultants, looking at the world's most improved education systems and what they had in common. And it would appear to be structures of education, resources put into education, and the processes of education, but not testing. So the keys to success, it would seem, and this is, I'm just summarizing what was in that report, are building teachers' skills, not only in instruction, but in managing learning and in managing schools. Assessing students for formative feedback for supporting learning, using the data that you get from testing within the school diagnostically to know who has problems with what part of the syllabus. National policy leadership of the kind we're talking about here today, getting the vision right, revising the curriculum to be more appropriate to the needs of the future, and ensuring that teachers are paid properly and are respected. That's nice. I'm glad that that's a key note of improvement. So I've been rash enough to say, you might want to prove me wrong, as far as I know, the most improved education systems are not those like the English one, which go in for high-stakes national testing. And our beloved Minister of State for Education only last week suggested that we reform our exam system at 16 to go back to having one hard exam for the more able and an easier exam for the less able, which we used to have in the 1950s and 60s, but we've since then had a common exam for all students at 16, which has been a tremendously empowering for students as far as any exam can be, but he wants to put the clock back, not forward, and have more and more and more hard testing. Not your problem. So I come to really my conclusion. This is a quotation from my colleague Guy Claxton and his book, New Kinds of Smart, which if you haven't come across it, I do recommend it. It's about how do we get children learning in the right way to be successful in the 21st century economy, society, and all the things that they will need for the 21st century. And basically, he's saying in this quotation, in the context of an assessment regime that prioritizes transmission of knowledge and the attainment of preconceived objectives, we will not be able to produce the kinds of student that we need for tomorrow. A broader vision of assessment needs to come, and it needs to follow this broader vision of learning that we've already heard articulated today. At the moment, our education system fails to reflect, it fails to capture the totality of learning and achievement that our children have because it focuses on what we're able to measure. It encourages teaching to the test, but the tests are not good tests of what we're trying to teach. So it impoverishes learning. I'm amplifying what I'm sure Guy Claxton wanted to say. There's a failure to use the full range of assessment tools which recognise the different sorts of learning, but I have to add there is a failure of assessment tools. We don't have the tools we need to assess the new kinds of learning. A nice quotation, which I hope is your take-home message for today: when we measure life, we reduce it. It comes actually from a book called The Tyranny of Numbers. I was very struck when Professor Valansky said this morning that we need a new world view. We do actually need a revolution in educational thinking, which puts our curriculum objectives, our educational objectives first, and works out how best to support the achievement of those objectives based on trusting teachers and indeed students. I've been very struck by the notion of spiritual freedom, which I've heard articulated this morning, and indeed from a Nobel Prize winner who said, education is impersonal and education is emotional. I was delighted to hear that because anybody who's ever taught anybody knows that that's true, but the system somehow seems to forget it. So what we've got from the tyranny of numbers is essentially, because it's so hard to measure what is really important, governments and institutions try to pin down something else. They think they're measuring the quality of the system, but actually the consequences of pinning down the wrong thing can be severe. I started off with a title, High Stakes, High Price, How Testing Damages Learning. I believe the evidence is clear, and I hope very much that you will find inspiration from an alternative model of education, which we're going to hear about now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Broadfoot. I'd like just to make one comment about this most interesting and important talk. To add something taken from a gentleman you have quoted, namely a good friend of ours, many know him, David Berliner, who wrote an important book about this and added one more angle, which I have to say bothers me a lot, namely the possible political agenda behind high-stake testing. It's very interesting that it was Mrs. Thatcher in the United Kingdom, it's a Republican Party in the United States that introduced high-stake testing. Here in Israel, we have right now in Jerusalem, for example, a right-wing mayor who is very much in favor of publishing the results of all schools so everybody can see who is doing well and who is not. And I have a sense here, together with Berliner, it's not just a naive educational thinking that is behind high-stake testing. And that lurks behind everything there. We have to examine it carefully. We will now see a brief movie about Finland, and then have the talk of our Finnish guest.
Hi, I'm Tony Wagner, the Innovation Education Fellow at the Technology and Entrepreneurship Center at Harvard. I recently wrote a book called The Global Achievement Gap, which explores the new skills all students will need for careers, college, and citizenship in this global knowledge economy versus what's being taught and tested even in our best schools here in the US. This resulted in an extraordinary invitation from the National Board of Education of Finland to consult with them as they think about their comprehensive education system for the 21st century. I accepted because Finland is the highest ranked country in the world by any education standard. And I wanted to understand what is it that has gotten them this far and what might be some of the lessons we could learn here in this country. So join me as we take a trip to Finland to learn about their extraordinary education system.
The question that is oftentimes asked when we get visitors from other countries to Finland, why are Finnish students successful? In Finland, families value education. They think that it's important.
The same system for all the pupils. No matter what their social background is, no matter what their parents do and so on, so everybody gets the same, similar education.
We have a consensus about what we want young Finns to be after. We want to provide a broad citizenship for every Finn.
While we were in Sippo, I visited an elementary school, grades 1 through 6. A couple things stood out for me. First of all, the size of the school, small. Their schools, elementary, middle, and high, are much smaller than ours because they understand the importance of more intimate working relationships between teachers and relationships between students and teachers. Class size also tended to be smaller, on average about 20. But the other thing that stood out was in this particular lesson I observed, where students were learning about different sources of energy, both renewable and non-renewable, in second grade. But after they'd been studying energy for several weeks, the teacher asked them to write a puppet show, imagining that the power had gone off in their home, and then representing what would happen. Real-life experience, thoughtful concepts, and the arts integrated into one curriculum.
We arrive at school maybe something like 8 o'clock, but if you're lucky you can come to school later.
Like 10, 11 or... Last year I had or we both had, actually almost every day from 8 till 4. But when we're now seniors, so life is much easier now. So in the next period when we have only 4 courses. Or 3. So we have maybe some days we have only 2 lessons. We come to school at 12 and leave at 4, or come to maybe 11 and leave at 2. So it really depends how you do your course, how you choose them.
Most people do this upper secondary in 3 years, but it's also possible to do this in 2 or 4 years. So, of course, if you do in 4 years, that means you have... you don't have that many lessons every day.
In my free time, I see my friends, and I fence, sword fighting, and then I play with my computer and.
A Finnish school which is connected to the university that does teacher training. So what we expect to see are regular academic classes being taught by teachers who are also training student teachers. Here what we have is the lesson plan for the math class we're about to go visit with Johannes. And he outlines for us what was done in the previous lesson, which was the discovery of the Pythagorean theorem, which he just described to us. Now what we're going to apparently see is some oral calculation, proof of theorem, checking homework, how to calculate legs, that'll be interesting, written examples, individual practice, a short test of taught matter, and finally homework and self-evaluation. And it's a 75-minute class, so we're off to learn some math this morning.
Oikeastaan we have very little testing, perhaps, Yes. We don't have practically any testing until the end of the high school.
Yeah, the matriculation exam.
Yes.
The more relaxed atmosphere that characterizes classrooms now seems to facilitate and improve learning and student motivation.
We try to all the time say that it's up to you that you learn. Yes. And this is good for your future, and it's fun to learn.
So what did students have to do? You wanted them to understand this theorem.
I wanted them to discover the theorem.
To discover it?
Discover the theorem.
Well, that's a really important distinction, isn't it?
Yes. The emphasis is not so much on mechanical performance, but on using math in concrete situations and sort of understanding the math. Our school system is very much oriented toward this kind of understanding and reading, and also some problem solving and this kind of things.
Teachers have always been revered in Finland. In the villages, they were the wise elders that people went to for advice and so on. But what is particularly striking about the Finnish story is how they have changed the nature of teaching Teachers are no longer assembly line workers. Page 87 by October 5 in the textbook. They have become knowledge workers working collaboratively, thinking of their classroom as their laboratory for continuous innovation, trying to understand how to ensure that all students achieve at very, very high levels.
Teachers are the ones who facilitate students to create, to do knowledge work together. And this kind of a knowledge co-creation happens in these learning environments. Today, teachers in Finland lead this kind of a multi-professional work together with those who work in libraries, science centers, museums. Young people in Finland, they want to be teachers, and we get very competent teacher students. We have 5-year study programs for all teachers, both class teachers and subject teachers. Subject teachers, they major in their subject, and class teachers, they major in their educational studies. So it's 3 years of bachelor's and 2 years of master's.
I've been a student. It's quite rare that all teachers have the university master's degree.
Yes.
I think most countries don't have that. It's probably one factor.
The main reasons for our success, I would say, that it's teacher education, that we're able that we have teachers that all have masters.
We call it a research-based teacher education. And it means that it's much more important to learn to think pedagogically and be a reflective, inquiry-oriented teacher.
Even if you do extremely well in both your matriculation examination and have good grades in your report card, you cannot just walk in. So you have to do well also in the entrance examination. And for that you have to study quite a lot, I'm afraid, because the percentage who manage to start their studies at the university, that's quite low in Finland.
We have much more applicants than what we can take in. So teachers' profession is very, very highly appreciated here in Finland. This year there were 1,600 applicants, and we could take in only 10% of those people.
But if you manage to get into the university, so you start your subject studies, they have to have a degree in these subjects that they teach. They have lessons, they have tutorials, they have small group discussions at the university. Then they sit down with the supervising teacher, and then we actually start planning the lesson or lessons. They write a lesson plan. Usually they plan their own teaching. We discuss it, and then they make the changes. They send it back to me again. And then they give their lesson. After that, we have a quick feedback session with the students who have also been observing the class. These feedback sessions, they are very, very important. Actually, it takes a lot more time to actually fulfill one lesson.
So it means that the students we get in, they are very motivated, and they are very, very well educated when they come in. So they are very high quality students.
So I've just spent the day observing classes, talking to teachers and students, and trying to better understand what is it that actually happens in classrooms that accounts for these extraordinary results. Several things we observed that were in common to all of these classes. These classes really focused on teaching students how to think, giving students a sense of being able to really actively engage in their learning, not penalizing mistakes. Finally, I was struck by the attention to detail in the ways in which these master teachers work with student teachers in their classes. There is a technique, a methodology, if you will, a national curriculum for preparing these teachers so that they get a great deal of classroom experience, they get a great deal of coaching on how to become a better teacher, and there's a clear understanding about what, in fact, is good teaching. Finnish education system way outperforming every other country. How do you understand that as both a teacher and a parent?
A big part of it is that we take care of those children that are not doing so well at school. So we have got very qualified special education.
Early interventions, we hear.
Yes, we try to find out what's the problem behind the learning problems, because often it's something that we can avoid by teaching in different way.
So here is our class. So we had a theme day in school.
What was the theme?
We are mafia family.
I kind of guessed.
Yeah.
So also homework. I'm not concerned about that at all. I've always known that they do their homework. I never check if they do
You don't have to check. You don't. No. Do you even ask what's your homework, or how much homework do you have this week?
No. Sometimes when I try to be a good mom.
I had a chance to visit some schools while I was in Finland. The Sippo school was especially interesting. We spent some time in elementary classes, but then we went over to the high school. Now, high school there is grades 10 through 12, and what is particularly interesting about what they call their upper secondary is that students have a choice between a more academic track or a vocational track. About 40%, 45% choose the non-academic technical track, because they know that's going to prepare them for a good job right out of high school. There's a respect and a dignity about all work in Finland, and what matters most is the skillfulness and intelligence you bring to whatever job you may have.
After basic education, young Finns go to, about 45% go to vocational education and training. About 50% go to upper secondary general schools. The balance between vocational education and training sector and upper secondary general sector is very good for Finland, and we set a policy target a decade ago for us that we should actually have more balanced situation in Finland. Reasons behind it, there must be actually developments of vocational education and training sector. However, there isn't any dead ends nowadays. We have actually made our education system so flexible that actually you can continue studies after vocational education and training at universities, or you can actually come back to general education if you want to. So it's very open nowadays.
Learning is something to use cultural tools. All kind of tools. If you have a lot of tools, you can learn even more.
So it's like an online learning environment.
It's online learning environment.
Where they are sharing projects with one another.
Yes, everything is shared. Yes.
Everything is shared. They're working on projects together online. You're giving them lectures online that they can access?
No, not lectures.
But you give them problems or challenges that they have to solve. So tell us a little bit about the class we're just going to go see.
It is, I think there are some 20 students.
And what are they going to be working on?
They are working kind of geography study about African countries.
Okay. Hanna, can you tell me what you're working on, please?
I'm searching some information about African land Togo, which is this.
How much time do you have to work on this project?
About 5 weeks.
5 weeks? Just to work on this project?
Yes.
And you're working alone for 5 weeks?
Yeah.
Is that hard?
Well, I don't think so. It's actually, I kind of enjoy this. I think this is quite fun.
Do you find this useful? Would you rather be reading a textbook and taking tests?
I think this is quite a good way to learn.
Use more of your own creativity, your own thinking, and your own ideas about how to create an effective mind map?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, by luck, I stumbled on this student project in one of the schools where students were learning about innovation and entrepreneurship by forming teams that had to produce a new product or service overnight, quite literally. They were spending the night in schools with their teams and with adult chaperones, learning the skills of innovation and entrepreneurship. You know, it's a very rare school in our country that teaches anything like that. We have some schools that do an extraordinary job of giving all students a work-based internship. Some schools that enable students to do what we call service learning, community service. But I think in Finland, these things are far more common, whereas in our country, they are the exception to the rule. Tell us a little bit about this innovation camp. What is it about?
Well, it's about what is called entrepreneurial.
Entrepreneurship?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're here to, how do I say this? Well, people are coming here. We are forming groups, 5, 6, 7 people about in a group, and they're going to start a business here.
Is it true you're going to be here all night long?
Yes, 24 hours, 26.
26 hours?
Yes.
What is the point of being here all night long?
It exhausts you to a limit where you
really got to push it to the limit, yeah. Well, if you hang around for 24 hours with the same people over here, well, you learn to know the people that you're working with, so you get better teamwork.
But teamwork, of course. And think more freely, not so...
More open-minded.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, you have to be really social in these things. Really. It's not that obvious for everyone. So, well, people may think that you can, well, I can make a company of my own and I can do it all by myself. I don't need any help. That's not true. You learn it here.
The system in Finland relies on the principle of equality and equity. As a parent, you are sure, wherever you live in this country, that your child is getting same type of education with same type of curriculum.
So it's equal and it's free. They get all the materials free of charge. They get their food, lunches, even snacks like in our school, free of charge. It's very democratic in that way.
Can you tell me about the balance between what is done nationally versus what is done locally?
Yeah. Nowadays, Finnish state and actually Finnish National Board of Education sets core curriculum for basic education. It gives much leeway to schools and municipalities to operate.
It's also blessedly brief, isn't it? I mean, your curriculum frameworks are about this thick, aren't they?
It's about that.
Which is really extraordinary when I think about our textbooks.
That's true.
In our society, we have a core curriculum, and then schools make their own curriculums, and they have lots of liberty in making their own decisions.
The second phase was actually that during 1980s we moved teacher education and training to universities, so that all teachers are required nowadays master's degree in universities.
We do not have any kind of an inspectorate. You know, there are no inspecting schools or teachers. We kind of trust to our system.
You know, we have a whole system where principals are supposed to come in and formally evaluate the teacher. But you don't do that here, do you?
In Finland, the school's education system is based on trust. That the teachers are trusted to do their work properly. If people are trusted, then they want to be worth that trust. They are more bound to be trustworthy. I think people perform better when they are trusted. They do a better job when they are not controlled, because nobody wants to be told what to do. So
there is a huge trust to all levels in this educational system we have.
So tell me about this 2020 conference. You're here today to talk about education in 2020. You're already the best in the world. What are you worrying about? Why are you thinking about 2020?
Although PISA tables say that we are topping many of the PISA studies, our national evaluations show that we have areas where we need to go further. For example, writing skills, communication skills. But to be more profound, it is about education itself. What are the outcomes of education? And there we have to bear in mind that we have been too strictly academic so far. So it's not enough to memorize things. We should actually learn how we use the knowledge. It's not distinction between 21st century skills or academic skills. We need both. And we don't want to abandon the good situation we have in academic skill area. No, that's definitely true.
It's much more important to learn to think than to learn to repeat some basic subject matter things.
Family values are important, education is important, reading is important. It's important to understand reasons behind things, concentrate, read, dream, talk, understand, reason, find solutions yourself.
Finnish education is still too subject-oriented. We should actually highlight thinking skills, collaborational skills, that kind of skills which are more higher order.
As we think about what has to happen in this country, it's not just changing what's taught and how things are taught, but really reshaping the teaching profession. And it's not about money. It's about teachers thinking of themselves as knowledge workers, teachers understanding that they have to be innovators in the classroom every single day as they think about bringing all students to high levels of attainment.
I'd like to invite Professor Jouni, how do you pronounce it? Välijärvi. Will I be forgiven? From Finland, who is going to talk about the educational system in Finland. And then I hope we have a little time for a few comments and questions from the audience. So, please.
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning to all of you. After that film, I have the feeling that I don't have anything to add to that everything has been said already. But I tried to, anyway, to make some comments on that and maybe raise some issues which were not mentioned and not handled so much in that film. But anyway, many of the basic ideas which were raised in that film are also behind my thinking on the Finnish education. I'm just testing how to... Could someone help how to change the next? Okay. Now okay. Okay. Here are the main topics of my presentation. I don't have so much time as I talk in advance, so I will skip some of the slides which were already discussed in that film. But these are the main topics. I will concentrate on the system level and some political issues and use very much PISA data to showing how Finnish educational policy during last, let's say, 30, 40 years have succeeded to reach the main goals that has been set by Finnish government and Finnish society. I don't speak very much about teacher education because my colleague, Dr. Silander, will talk about that later this afternoon. Well, Finnish education system was described quite in detail in the film, so I don't go back to that. As it was mentioned, we have basically the same basic education for all children. There are some possibilities for optional studies in upper level of comprehensive school, as we call it. And preschool education is not compulsory in Finland, but in practice almost all students participate in that. And on secondary and tertiary level, system is divided into two main lines. I wouldn't like to speak about tracks because there's a lot of possibilities to move from one line to another, and also combine studies, for instance, in upper secondary level. And the basic idea in educational policy in this sense has been, last 30 years, that we have tried to abolish all dead ends in the system. Even if you go to vocational education, you have always possibility to continue until university level. Most of these things were said already in the film. What was impressive to me to hear this morning that Israel is investing 8% of GDP to education. In Finland it's around 6%. And the idea in Finnish, in the funding of the Finnish educational system has always been to have balance between national and local level. State has balanced the differences between municipalities, local level resources to organize education, so that the target has been to keep the quality and resources similar in all schools and in all parts of the country. And later I will show how we have succeeded in that. But in that sense we can say that there's a quite interesting balance between state level and local level in Finnish educational system. State level takes care of the quality of the system, but the main organizer of practical level have always been municipalities. And then if we think of the Finnish educational policy, we can say that equality and equity has not been only words in Finnish educational policy. A lot of work has been done already after Second World War to guarantee first equal access to all students to go to high quality education, to construct schools all over the country. And in practice it has meant that schools have been quite small, and even today they are quite small. In the next phase it meant equalizing opportunities to high quality learning. It meant, as it was mentioned earlier, moving teacher education to university level, setting master degree, the minimum standard for primary teachers too, and also abolishing tracking and streaming, emerging earlier two type of schools into one in 70s. And nowadays equality means more and more guaranteeing equal learning outcomes. We will later see that that is not the case in Finland and not in many other countries. But anyway, the political target has been always, or has been from 70s in Finland, very much to balance differences between lowest performing students and the best performing students. And that has meant investing a lot on special education, helping students with learning problems. And I will show later how we have succeeded in that. This is only showing how Finland has been doing in PISA study in different cycles, starting from 2000 and 2009. And as you can see, Finland has been doing quite well in all three domains. While comparing different PISA studies, it's a little bit complicated because there are the different number of countries participating. But the main message is that in the international context, the quality of our learning outcomes in PISA, that is really trying to develop international assessment to more authentic, more student-oriented, more practically oriented assessing. In that type of testing, Finland has been doing quite well. And what has been especially surprising is that Finland has been quite strong in science. Traditionally, we know from many other international studies that reading has been always a strong part of the Finnish educational system. Then some features about the main findings from PISA and some other studies. First of all, we have been doing, as I said, well in all three domains, and there's also quite high equality in performances of 15-year-olds. What does that mean? I will come back to that later. Very clear challenge for Finnish educational system is gender issue. We have one of the largest differences between boys and girls, especially in reading. Well, the last one is also typical for Finland, and that's why I raise it later in one of the key issues when we look at the future, is that we have very high correlation between the motivation of students and their attitudes in general and in their learning outcomes. And if you think how we can develop our system, we should focus more and more this attitudinal side. Well, these are the averages in three domains, in three different PISA studies in reading, mathematics, and science. And keeping in mind that the international average has been 500 points from the beginning of PISA, Finland has been doing quite well. To get some understanding what these figures means and these differences means, you can keep in mind that around 40 points means 1 year, one school year comparing different countries or different students. If one student is 40 points ahead of another student, it means that his or her reading skills or math skills or science skills are about 1 year ahead in these subjects. And so you can see that Finland, compared to OECD average, Finland has been doing around 1.3 years ahead in most studies. But what is a bit worrying is that 2009 there was a small decline in averages, and now we are of course very interested what will happen in next PISA 2012. Will this trend continue, or will be able to come back to the same level as earlier? This is telling about the variation between learning outcomes in Finland, and this is quite a good testimony that our educational policy has been quite successful, keeping in mind that OECD average in these standard deviations in all three subjects, all three domains is around 100 points. So it means that in Finland, between student variation, what is the variation between individual students, it's around 80 to 85% of that in OECD countries on average. Comparing countries, it's typically, in most cases, it's among the smallest, many cases, especially in mathematics, it's the smallest among OECD countries. So it's telling that we have been doing, we have reached the target to keep the between student variation smaller, or at least it's smaller than in most other countries. Well, this slide is a little bit complicated, but it's telling how different type of students are doing in Finnish system. There on the left side is the difference between, the fifth percentile there on the left means the level that students, the 5% of weakest performing students are reaching in PISA, in different PISA studies. And the difference between 0 level and the line is difference between OECD countries and Finland. And as you can see, in Finland, the lowest performing students with the lowest outcomes in PISA have been doing very well if you compare them to similar group of students in other OECD countries. It's telling the same as the previous picture, that Finnish education system has been quite successful with lowest performing students, students with low achievement, when we compare them to same group of students in other countries. But also if you compare the 95th percentile, that tells the top performing 5%, their level, even then the difference is positive to Finland. And what is once again a little bit worrying is that the difference has declined when we compare different studies, and that's the big issue for the future. And keeping once again in mind that around 40% means 1 year difference, 1 school year difference in student outcomes. It's a very same story if we use science or mathematics, so I don't go very much in detail here, but it's telling that this is the part where our system is quite successful. And what has been the most important political message of this is that if you want to raise the average of the learning outcomes, if you want to reach the excellence in the educational system, you have to take good care of the weakest performing students. So traditionally we have used to think that equity and excellence are two different targets, two different aims for developing educational systems. That was the advice given by OECD before PISA, but not only Finland, but some other countries have shown in PISA that equity and excellence seems to go hand in hand. And equality of the system, it comes first, and then it's possibility to reach also excellence in system level. I don't go in detail in these figures because we don't have very much time. They are telling the same story as the previous from little perspective. I go through some background factors which are important to understand why our outcomes are quite high. One that was raised also in that film is that the impact of social background in Finland is one of the smallest, or actually it's almost the smallest among OECD countries. So one important message from PISA is that if you manage to guarantee equal outcomes for students coming from families with low social status and from upper class students with upper classes, it seems to raise the general level of the learning outcomes. But this doesn't mean that in Finland this impact is zero, that correlation is zero. Even in Finland, if you think, what does it mean in student level to come from the lowest quarter measured by socio-economic background, social, economic, cultural status, as it's mentioned here. It means that compared to highest quarter of students using this same indicator, the difference is almost it's around 60 points. It means a difference around 1.5 years measured in school years. So even in Finland, the social background still today has quite a strong impact on the learning outcomes. So this type of issues are something we have to struggle for all the time, developing the educational system to keep the quality high. We can say that in Finland the correlation is smaller, much smaller than in other countries, but it doesn't help very much of those students who are coming from poor families and environment where families, parents are not able to support their children. We have to develop our system to take care of these students and their needs and their special needs. Next slide is telling about the differences between schools. From all PISA studies, we know that one of the special features in Finnish system is that it has managed to keep the differences between schools very small compared to other countries. In this picture, this variation between students is divided to school level variation, what are the differences between schools in outcomes in PISA, and then the rest is individual level. And as you can see, Finland and other Nordic countries are systems where differences between schools are among the smallest. And this has very important impact in practical level in Finland, especially if we keep in mind that this means also that the social status, what kind of students each school gets, in what kind of environment they are working, there the impact is almost zero in Finland compared to countries like Japan or Germany, where the quality of schools is very much depending on the context where they are working, in what kind of students they get, what kind of teachers they get. It differs. There's a huge variation between schools, for instance, in Japan and Germany. And from that it follows that parents are competing to get their children to best schools. And Finnish educational policy in that sense has been very different, and the outcomes have been very different, that we have managed to keep the impact of schools on learning outcomes when we control the individual background factors. We have managed to keep that very equal. It doesn't depend very much into what kind of school you send your child in Finnish system, and that's a real strength. And it means that we are not so much interested about the individual schools and league tables and setting schools into ranking orders. And then some words about special education. We can say that special education has a very important role in Finnish educational system, and what we are stressing is the early recognition and prevention of learning difficulties, to help children before they start their school career. And in that, kindergartens and preschool has very important role. And also research that, and our own university is one of the leading universities in that. Many of the other things mentioned here you have heard. And then how we organize special support in school level. Basically, the idea that every student has right for individual support if he or she wants. That's a subjective right for all students. But what comes to the learning problems, there are different levels in how we try to handle. First level is that is called intensified support. That is always part-time, maybe 1 or 2 hours per week, so long as problems have been solved, for instance, in mathematics, so that students can continue in his own home group. Many cases, special teachers coming to help individual student or students, or taking students for 1 or 2 hours for special treatment. And about 1/4 of students are getting this type of support. And then in more serious cases, it means special groups, and also they are basically on occasionally basis. They are not regular classes, trying to get students back to their own teaching groups, but this is not always possible, and that's why these special groups are always located into ordinary schools, as part of the regular schools, not taking them separately. And around 1.2% of students are in special schools in most severe cases. I was speaking about gender gap. I don't have very much possibilities to go more in detail, but this is a real challenge, not so much because boys are doing badly in reading, but girls are doing so well in reading. So in national level, the difference between boys and girls is quite dramatic. Actually, it's the biggest among OECD countries. And there have been a lot of projects in Finland to make this smaller, but very little change has taken place in 10 years. And this is only telling that when we are speaking about students with at risk, they are in the lowest level of reading, level 1 and below. You can see that the boys are huge majority in that area. And we have a lot of analysis what is behind this difference. And it seems to be so that it goes very much to the motivation of students. And what I would like to raise here is when we are looking at the future of educational systems, I would say that how we motivate teachers, how we motivate students to work for their learning, to come to school in the present society when there are a lot of competing activities around themselves, around young people outside the school. That is a real challenge, maybe the most demanding challenge we have ahead. How we motivate, how we make young people to understand that school is important for them, and how we develop instructional practices that they are really reasonable from the point of view of students. This seems to be something that we share between all Western countries and well-developed countries today. And for instance, in PISA, we can see that more and more boys, especially boys, are losing their interest in traditional reading, and that's one explanation why the outcomes seem to go down when we correlate these two issues. And here you can see that it's a real gender issue in Finland. In girls' world, reading is still very important, but not in boys' world. And this is telling the high correlation between motivation and learning outcomes. And what is also typical, and Finland is one of those extreme cases, that in mathematics it's the opposite. Boys and girls are doing quite the same in mathematics, but the attitudes are very different. Girls don't trust themselves in mathematics. They don't believe that they are able to do mathematics, even they are equally well as boys. And once again, in Finland is countries where the correlation is very high, telling that we have to be able to do something with these motivational issues which go back to primary education. I will skip some slides. You can go take a look on them later if you want, because of time restrictions. The last thing I would like to raise here is the question about standards and accountability that we have heard here, and where Finnish system today seems very different if we use PISA information and also how systems look in Finland and some other countries. And here Finland and UK seem to be two extreme countries in Europe. As it was mentioned in the film, we don't have any national testing systems in that sense as for instance UK, covering all students, all schools. We don't have that type of league tables before the end of academic upper secondary school. At the age of 18, about half of the age cohort take the first matriculation examination. It doesn't mean that we don't have any standards. It doesn't mean that we don't have any tests. In Finland, tests are seen tools for teachers, how they gather information about how students have learned for formative and diagnostic purposes. And of course, school tests are important for students, but they are never public in that sense as in many other countries. We don't have any inspectors anymore in Finland, as it was mentioned. What is stressed is self-concept of teachers, schools, and students. This is a picture from one journal showing what has happened for the role of teachers in global level in last 40 years. The role of teachers have changed quite dramatically if you look at that picture, and I think this is a reality, for instance, in UK and many other European countries, including also other Nordic countries where the system in many ways is similar as in Finland. And all this are telling that in Finland the Finnish system is still very much relying on trusting on teachers, that we really believe that teachers are highly educated professionals who are the best to organize, best to know how to organize the work in school level and in classroom level. And part of this, of course, is that they are trained in university level. This is telling how principals in different countries sees accountability and how students' achievements are used for accountability purposes in their schools. And here you can see that there's a dramatic difference between Finland and United Kingdom, but also compared to OECD average. In Finland, it's still very unusual that learning outcomes are used for evaluating teachers or principals, or that they are public in lower secondary level. And we know from other countries, especially from US, that more and more these learning outcomes are used for setting the teacher salaries today. We are very far away from that kind of situation, and hopefully we are able to stay far away. But I'm not quite sure, because we have similar pressures also in Finland. This is only telling that one reason is that the pressure coming from rest of the society in Finland is not so strong for accountability as in other countries. This is telling about the role of teachers in decision making, but Tiina will tell these issues more. Finally, only some pictures, keeping in mind that we have also very different resources for education. When we heard about Japan and Finland, it's important to keep in mind that the average size of a teaching group is very different issue in Finland and Japan or China or other Asian countries. There it's almost double compared to Finland. From a pedagogical point of view, it's totally different situation, and when it was talk about how to manage, how to organize classroom work, it gives very different situation. One is that's also telling about differences between educational system is grade repetition that is very small in Finland. And maybe the most obvious difference, what we have seen many times this morning, how much students use time for education. If you compare especially Korea and Nordic countries, you can see that we don't invest, or our students don't invest very much time if you compare to Asian countries. But what seems to be the difference, that the outcomes are quite similar, but the ways how Korean, Japanese students get good results and how our schools and our students get good results seem to be very different. And here I would say that what are the two strengths of the Finnish system, that we have managed to keep system quite equal to all students. We have a lot to do with that and struggle all the time for that, but maybe it's still more important that we have managed to keep teachers' profession very popular, that has been repeated many times, and guarantee the quality of education, and keep also the status of teachers in the society on very high level. And I would say that this last one is the most important cornerstone for the future, that we manage to have teachers who are really high quality in their teaching skills, but who are also respected by the rest of the society. And then I don't have time to go questions which are discussed today in Finland, but we also have a a lot of quite challenging issues. For instance, what is the role of education for preventing exclusion of young people, and gender issue, and these I have mentioned already. Thank you very much for your time.
Let me briefly mention what I've not mentioned before, that Jouni, he is the director of the Institute of the Educational Research and had a hand both in the IEA, the International Evaluation of Student Achievements, an organization we are familiar with long before PISA. And that later on he had a hand in PISA, which we look at very carefully. We may have 2.5 minutes for 1 or 2 major questions or points, not speeches. So if anybody has got a very important question to any one of the 2 speakers, please raise your hand. Ken, yeah.
To either of our speakers, it seems as if nobody has said anything about Japanese culture or Finnish culture. It's all about policy and structure, etc. Is there anything about Finnish culture that you think explains some of the things that you've been talking about? What it is to be a Finn?
In other words, in 3 words, the Finnish culture.
Three words. Well, of course, it's very important. I could say that in a small country like Finland, and young, our independence is only less than 100 years. And in that process, education has played a key role. And teachers have played a key role. And this is part to understand why we have taken such a good care of teachers. This is the short answer. The long answer would take 2 days.
I really appreciate the question. It's absolutely fundamental. And if I had more time, I would have talked about the perils of policy borrowing, because you can't simply implement either the Japanese or the Finnish or indeed the English education system, for example, in Israel, which is a unique culture. I think Finland, like Scotland, is a small country, and Scottish education and indeed Welsh education is different from English education and doesn't have many of the features that I was talking about this morning. English education is deeply bedeviled by problems of inequality and what we call the long tail of underachievement. And it is these deep-rooted cultural problems which I think in a way drive the policy and the way in which policy makers think of possibilities. And it comes back to your earlier point about politics and ideology. So thank you for the question.
Perfect example of how can you summarize a country's culture in 5 sentences or less. I have one major question that I think is on everybody's mind. What of the 2 educational cultures or approaches might perhaps eventually, if we really think hard, fit or can be imported to our environment? It's a minor question, sort of, for the late afternoon. Thank you very much. I guess that